Okay. Thank you for that moment there. Welcome to today's Scrum Pulse. I'm Lindsay Velasina here with Scrum.org, and I'm super excited. We have a really great topic today, product definition, and Mary Iqbal, one of our professional Scrum trainers, is here to share her experiences with product definition and share some tactics from the field as well. So welcome, everybody, and welcome, Mary. Thanks so much for being here today. Next slide, please. Okay, so your microphones will be muted throughout. However, we do highly encourage you to ask any questions you have for Mary on this topic. So please utilize the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. And then any technical questions that you have, please feel free to drop those into the chat and send them over. And I will help you as much as I possibly can. But we do want to leave your questions for Mary in that Q&A box rather than in the chat. So we'll try to keep those separate. This session is being recorded and the slides will be shared as well within 24 hours on the Scrum.org website. And you will also get an email with a link to it as well. So next slide, please. So very quickly about Scrum.org, we are the home of Scrum, and we were founded by Ken Schwaber, one of the co-creators of Scrum, back in 2009, and our mission is to help people and teams solve complex problems, and we do so through our professional Scrum training, certification, and ongoing learning. And you probably already noticed since you signed up for this webinar, we have a lot of free learning opportunities on the Scrum.org website, and we highly encourage you to continue participating in those. And there's a lot of great blogs. Mary's a very avid blogger on the Scrum.org blog, so please check that out. And I hope today's session plays a role in your learning journey as well. So with that, I will hand it over to Mary to kind of kick us off and can define some products.
Thank you so much, Lindsay. I really appreciate it. And thank you for having me here today at the Scrum.org webinar. And thank you for everyone joining. So my name is Mary Iqbal. I am a professional Scrum trainer with Scrum.org. And I'm also the founder of Rebel Scrum. And I'm the host of the Scrum Day Madison Conference, which is coming up this year on October 16th. I have experience as an Agile transformation manager, managing over 60 Agile teams, or let's say improving the agility of over 60 Agile teams. I've done a lot of training and I have over 20 years of experience in Scrum. So I'm thrilled to be here with you today. And the topic, as Lindsay said, is product definition. And that is something that I'm really passionate about, taking that moment and that time to take a step back and ask, what are our products? What are we trying to deliver here? Who are our customers? What's the value we're trying to provide? To me, is an important moment for every Scrum team. And to kick us off on this topic, I want to start us off with, I'm going to call it a little bit of a diagnosis moment. And Lindsay's going to open up a poll in just a second here in the Zoom. And I'm going to be asking you, what problems are you facing in your Agile implementation? So Lindsay, if you could go ahead and open up that poll, I'm going to ask everyone to select up to 3 of the key problems that you're facing with your Scrum team today. So Lindsay, I'm gonna stop sharing and let you open up that poll now. And you'll see check boxes here. Select up to 3 issues that you're facing in your Scrum team. Now, I know, that it may be difficult, if you don't have problems or if you do have problems, but pick it up to 3 if you would, please. All right, so some of the problems we have in our list here are legacy systems, dependencies, clashes with company culture or leadership. Scrum is not being used consistently may be a problem that you're facing, or that you cannot measure value, or you're not getting feedback from customers in some other way. You may have a problem with predictability of deliverables, which means we're not consistent, right? Sometimes we're just not able to predict when are we going to get there. You may have a problem with project versus product, which means we're running too many projects. Like how can we get the focus that we need on our product? You may have a problem with customer support and new features, or maybe something else entirely. So if you could take that moment. And Lindsay, I think we're ready to close it up if you're ready.
Okay, so let's share the results here.
Okay, all right. So these, I got to tell you, this is kind of what I was expecting to see, and of course, this is the audience for that. But the number one problem we're seeing is dependencies and siloed teams.
Yes.
I'm not shocked, also given that this is the topic that we're talking about. So I understand there's some selection bias, but this is actually still, even with the selection bias, pretty consistent with what we're seeing in the industry. So I'm going to share my screen again, and here we go. Okay. Just one moment, bear with me. And I want to talk about for a moment, here we go, sharing. All right. All right. So this is pretty consistent with what I'm seeing elsewhere. So I worked with a financial services organization some short while back, and we asked the same question of them. What challenges are you facing with delivering early and frequently? And just like you, their number one problem was dependencies on other teams. We're waiting for work from someone else. We have to request work from someone else. We have to hand off work to someone else in order to finally get it done. This is very common. Doubling down on that, we asked them, some details about the problem that you're facing, and they came up with this. This was, the write-in comments that they had: team members, functional teams, working from the backlog, the release team. But I'm going to circle the ones that have to do with siloed teams and dependencies. So we have teams to be siloed, interdependent teams, dependencies, component teams, service teams. This is a very common issue in the industry. And I'm going to double down on that and say there is an annual State of Agile report that many of you may have heard of. I love it. I read it every year. I think it's brilliant. And the State of Agile report, it's created by Digital AI. Let's say it's published by Digital AI, and it comes out every year. This is the 17th year. The most recent report is the 17th version. And it's this global survey that asks questions like, why are you using Agile? Which framework are you using? But one of the questions is, why are you not satisfied with your company's Agile practices? And the number one reason last year for them was a mix of legacy systems. But the number two reason was siloed teams. 37% of people said siloed teams. But then if you look at also towards the bottom, and I've got a little line drawn to it, another answer was lack of visibility on dependencies. So if you add those together, right, that is still the number one reason that people are not satisfied. So this is very common in the industry. It's not just you. You're not alone is really the point of this. You're not alone. This is very common. And it's a big problem. We can't just put a Band-Aid on it. We can't, we can try to scale our way out of this, but it's really like putting a Band-Aid on it. We need to get to the root cause of why do we have these siloed teams? And to me, what I see a lot is what's happened is when organizations go Agile, they do so within their current reporting structures. I see this all the time in my own practice. So let's say you're going Agile. You might have separate DBA team and a separate web team and a separate reporting team and a separate this team and that team. And some teams even have separate testing teams. And what they do is they say, we're going to go Agile. And they go Agile within their current team. So I have a SQL team that's using Scrum, and then they have their own product owner. And I might have the C# people using Scrum, and they've got their own product owner. And it just proliferates all these different product owners. And I think what's happened is people heard about Scrum, and they heard, well, we need a product owner on every Scrum team. What they should do is actually take a step back and ask, what's my product? Right? If my product is a website, maybe I need content writers. Maybe I need, back-end developers, front-end developers, search engine optimization people, DBA people, possibly reporting people. I don't know, right? It depends on your technology, but all of those people working together to deliver that product. If you think about, Agile, one of the founding ideas behind Agile itself is this idea of cross-functional teams that have all the skills necessary to deliver value. And those teams working together with a single product owner from a single list, that alone to me is the single most impactful change that you can make to improve value delivery. Because when we talk about value, we're naturally asking the question, value for who? And that means who's our customer and what is our product? So I want to start by telling a little story about this that I think will really help bring this together for you. So some years ago, I was working with a team that, or let's say an organization that processed data. And they went agile. And the executive team said, well, we've got around 60 developers. Let's break them up into, I think it was 6 teams. So they had one team that loaded the data and they had their own product owner. And another team that matched the data up and they had their own product owner. Another team that processed the data and manipulated, did some things to it. They had their own product owner. They actually had 2 product owners. And then they had another team that sent invoices for processing the data and another team that, answered questions, right? They supported the customer service system that answered customer questions about processing the data. So you can see there was a lot of product owners and a lot of silos. And at first, things were better, right? Things were better than waterfall, right? You had a lot of transparency, ownership, excitement. But the longer they worked together, the worse it became. It started to get bogged down, right? In order to get anything done, every product owner had to request work from somebody else, right? So the team that was loading the data, if they wanted to make a change to how they load the data, they had to request work from the team who processed the data and the team who generated invoices for processing the data. So pretty soon it looked like a spaghetti. If you were to map out the dependencies, it looked like a bowl of spaghetti. We all have work from each other, and not just each other, but from these other technology teams as well. So it got bogged down, and they brought me in and they said, should we just go back to waterfall? This is awful, right? We thought this would be so much better. And so I came in and I did some analysis, some interviews, did a lot of watching, did a lot of talking. And I came back and I said, I think we need to redefine our products. I think we need to take a step back and ask the question, what are our products? And so they did that and they came up with 2 products. We have a team that overall processes the data and another team that supports the customer service team for processing the data, the system that the customer service teams use for answering questions about the data. So we took a step back. We asked, what are our products? There was a whole conversation about what is their product. It was a 2-day facilitated workshop. And after that, we asked the team to self-organize, right? So we defined our products. And then we said, okay, we want to let teams self-organize within those products. So we worked with the leaders to prepare. What are the guardrails within which we're going to allow these folks to self-organize? And the leaders came up with a list. We said, we want to have a mix of different skill levels on every team. We want to have, some teams that have, junior developers. Every team should have a mix of junior developers and senior developers. And we also said, every team should be able to pull any work. So we don't want, even within our product team, we don't want siloed teams. We want every team to be able to have folks who can make updates to processing data and folks that can make updates to loading data. So we wanted to make sure every team was cross-functional. So we prepared those guardrails with the leaders. And then we had a big self-organization session. It was actually 4 hours. And I think this one was done remotely, actually. And there were about 60 people in it. And so we had this big meeting with all the developers, all the testers, everyone who was going to be on the team. And we talked to them about, why are we self-organizing? One of the leaders stood up and gave a great speech about, we believe in you and we believe in your ability to deliver value. And we want to allow you to self-organize. The product owner stood up. So we had now one product owner. And the product owner stood up and she talked about what's the vision for the product? Where are we going? What's our goal? What are some of the highest things on her roadmap? And she talked us through that. And then we presented the guardrails. Here's the guardrails, the rules within which you're going to be allowed to self-organize. And then we actually broke them into groups and we asked them to come up with proposals. How do you want to organize yourself? And they came up with those proposals and each group presented it to the larger group. And finally, we voted. We want to have 6 teams or 5 teams, whatever it was. And that's how we want to structure ourselves. And once they decided upon the team structure, then they were allowed to just pick what team they wanted to be on, which amazingly, that took like 2 minutes because we'd been there all day. They'd already kind of decided. And then we had our teams. And then we, closed the meeting and we assigned, well, actually each Scrum Master had selected which team they wanted to be on. And those Scrum Masters did some prep work, right? Making sure we had a definition of done, making sure that all the events were scheduled, putting together team agreements. But then we just started sprinting, right? We self-organized and we started sprinting. And what happened was within 3 months, there was a significant throughput increase, which throughput's not the best measure of success, but also we had a 20% decrease in lead time, 30% increase in customer satisfaction. That is, and also let's say the morale went up by 7 points, which I'm told is very significant. So it was a huge success. And that team still more or less uses that same structure several years later. Now, when I say the same structure, what happened was that when new things came up, the team self-organized themselves. So they actually changed their own structure, I think 2 or 3 times in the years since then, or the several years since then. So this was hugely successful. It changed the culture of the team. They felt like they owned their product and they felt empowered to self-organize when things needed to change. They made some changes to that. So it was very successful, a very successful experience, a very positive experience. Now, every organization will have a mix of different products, right? That was one product within that organization, those 60 folks. There were other products within the organization. Some are large, some are small. And there are still some teams that remain, I would say, somewhat siloed. So for example, server teams generally tend to be just, they provide servers. That is their product. It's an internal product. There are some teams that do remain siloed with the organization. So how big do you draw that product box? It depends on dependencies. Back to our number one problem. So if you regularly have dependencies on another team, you may need that technology within your product team, that skill set within your product team. So that's something that all comes back to when you define your product. So we're going to talk more later on today about defining your product and what are the steps for defining your product. But I want to take this moment to talk about the symptoms. How do you know that you need to do this? How do you know that you need to define your products? There are some symptoms that are pretty common. So I want to ask you all, in the chat here, do you, and we're gonna do a little informal survey at this point. So how many of you are waiting, or you often are waiting for work from another team? Just put it in the always waiting. Absolutely. Okay. Wow. Got a lot coming through. Yes. Regularly deliver value to your customer. You may be asking the question of, do we need to take a step back and define your product? Maybe, right? Or maybe we need to add that technology skill set to our product team. Let me ask another question. How many of you work with stakeholders, and those stakeholders have to request work from multiple teams to get anything done? So for example, I have a web, in order to actually deliver value to the customer, your stakeholder has to go to 5 different teams. I have to go to the web team, I have to go to this team, I have to go to that team, I have to go to the content writing team to deliver that product. It's a little bit more of an obscure question. So for example, back to our data processing team, if we wanted to make change, if a customer, an internal stakeholder had wanted to make a change to the way we process data, they might have to request work separately from this product owner, that product owner, that product owner, that product owner. So does that happen to your internal stakeholders? You do? Yes. Okay. Yes. And I have one person that said, yes, stakeholders who have to filter requests from both upstream and downstream. Yeah. All right. So that is a red flag right there. Somebody said, what's a stakeholder? Just kidding. That's pretty funny. Thank you for that. I love that. Yep. And I have some comments. So yes. All right. So these are some of the common symptoms that you may have that indicate, yes, we might need to take a step back and think about what is our product. So another way to visualize this, right? And this is a simple visualization, but imagine that the product really is the box right here. This is a present, all right? Let's say a product that I'm delivering to my customer. And an organization may have said, oh, we're going to specialize. We're going to have one team that just works on the top left-hand corner of the box. And we're going to have another team that works on this sliver here. They're almost cross-functional. And we have another team that works on the top right-hand corner. This sort of is a visual representation of what is a very common symptom. And it's, I got to say, tragic, actually, when organizations do this, because they're trying to be efficient. But what they're really doing is slowing down value delivery. So what really matters to people? That's another question that was asked in the annual State of Agile report from Digital AI. Why are you going Agile? And for the last 10 years, the number one reason, sometimes tied for first, but still the number one reason was deliver value sooner. And they use slightly different words in different years, but that's what it came down to. We went Agile. Most organizations go Agile to deliver value sooner, to accelerate software delivery. That's why we're doing this. And, returning to the previous slide, this does not do it. If in order to make, let's say I wanted to change the box color, I'd have to request work from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 other teams to do anything. That's not or if I wanted to increase the size of box, what a nightmare, right? If we're here to deliver value sooner, then siloing into these teams does nothing but slow value delivery, right? So I have to request work from this team and explain to them why I'm doing it. It's tragic. It's handcuffing your teams and slowing down value delivery. And it's tragic because organizations think, or let's say executives think, that they're helping by specializing the teams, and it's not helpful at all. In fact, it makes it so that we can't see the big picture. It makes it very difficult to see the big picture. It makes it very difficult for us to focus on the customer. When instead of focusing on the customer, I'm actually focusing on, okay, how can I make this box really, this top corner really fit in with the rest of the box? It's not easy when you're living that way. Another organization that I worked for, they hired a separate design team, right, to help them deliver this product. And the design team had their own product owner, their own product backlog. And then we had the backend team that had their own product owner and their product backlog. So the way it worked is the front-end team worked about a sprint out ahead of us. That was the original idea. They'll work a sprint ahead, and then they'll deliver work, and the backend team will take that design and put it together in our own custom system and deliver value. So that would mean we deliver value after 2 sprints. It's not so bad, right? What really happened is the design team delivered work, and then the functional team got it and they said, we can't do this, shoot it back. And then the design team would deliver us something else, and we'd say, well, we can't do it, shoot it back. And then they would deliver us something else, and it's buggy, it doesn't work, we don't know how to do this, send it back. And so it became this washing machine where work just kind of goes into the washing machine and or cycles around from team to team to team, back and forth and back and forth. So we had the bright idea, or the leadership team had this idea, well, okay, let's do refinement together. That'll help, right? And it did help, but it didn't solve the problem, right? Then we had buggy code, and we still didn't know how to implement it. So it went on and on and on and on, months and months of this. And I'm witnessing this from afar going, can't we just have them on the same team? Couldn't we, a better way to solve this would be, let's have those designers actually work on the Scrum teams with developers. Let's deliver a done increment, because what we're trying to deliver is a fully functional, web-based system. We're not just delivering design. We're not just delivering back-end functionality. They need to be on the same team, sprinting together, talking to each other, so that by the end of the sprint, it works. That's what we're trying to deliver here. The purpose of the sprint is to deliver a done increment that's fully functioning and works. So if you think about this, visualize this a slightly different way. User interface, sometimes middleware, sometimes backend. We need all of these different types of skills often to deliver web-based systems, for example. It does not make sense to have a Scrum team that's just UI or a Scrum team that's just middleware. In most contexts or in frequent contexts, if you need all of those technologies or all of those skill sets to deliver a done product, then you need them on your team. But again, it goes back to, how big do I draw that product box? Well, it depends. What is my product? So before you build your team, ask that question, what is my product? And only when you know what my product is, then you can ask the question, what skill sets do I need to deliver that product? Maybe you do need a data team. Maybe you don't. It depends on what is your product. So how do I know what my product is? Let's back it up even further and go back to the root. A great way to define your product is to start with the customer. Asking the question, and this is a question that you're going to ask not individually, right? But maybe a group of people gets together. Maybe it's executives, managers, some developers getting together and asking that question. Who is my customer? And maybe you come up with a list of customers. Maybe it's not one customer. Maybe it's several different types of customers. And for each of those types of customers, what are their pains? What gains are they seeking? And then for each one of those pains, what are the pain relievers that we're providing? What are the gain enhancers that we're providing? And only once you really understand who are my customers and what are they looking for from us, then you can provide a list of, okay, well, what are the services that I am providing? And maybe it's not one, maybe it's lots of different services. And then you can take those services and group them together. These belong together. This is the services that belong together. This is why they come to us. Then that is your product. And you may have more than one, but taking that moment and understanding what are the products in my organization is crucially important to making sure that we're focused on value delivery. Once you understand what is my product, then you can ask the question, okay, what resources types, what skills do I need for that product? And then you can prepare to self-organize. Once you understand what are the skills, who are the people, and then you can actually self-organize, or actually I would train them first. I would go through a training initiative and make sure they're prepared to self-organize. And then you can let them self-organize, and then you can start sprinting. When you define those products, it may be that you need to inspect and adapt the products themselves. But what about larger teams? Does this work with larger teams? And I would say absolutely this works with larger teams. If you have 60 or 70 teams, maybe you scale with something simple called Nexus. So take a look at Nexus. But yes, this can absolutely work for larger teams, even extremely large teams. You may have multiple products that work together on a platform. If you have very large teams, remember that Conway's law is something that impacts you. So what is Conway's law? Conway's law states that the structure of a software system mirrors the communication structures of that organization. What does that mean? That means, imagine, and this is the actual example that Conway used, imagine that you're delivering a compiler, software compiler. Well, if that software compiler is developed by 6 separate teams, whatever it is, with 6 different lists of requirements, then the compiler that you deliver is going to have 6 different steps. So when you're defining your products, take that moment to understand what is the product, right? If it's the software compiler, maybe you just have one team, one product owner, one product backlog. So wrapping this up, remember, right, some of the symptoms, if you don't take that moment to define your product, you're going to have a lack of whole product focus, fragmented delivery, dependencies that slow value, siloed teams. A high work in progress actually is a surprising symptom of not defining your products. And the reason for that is if I'm waiting for work from other teams, you almost have, well, you don't have to, but a lot of teams tend to start other work while they're waiting. So you tend to get a higher work in progress when you don't define those teams or when you don't define those products. Overcommitting, right? You think you're going to get this done, but oh, we were waiting for someone else. And so you're overcommitting. You will have, let's say, conflicting priorities where team A, the top corner of the box, wants to focus on this, while the bottom right-hand corner of the box wants to focus on that. So we have conflicting priorities. And roadmaps are not really aligned, or often not aligned, or if they are, it takes a lot of effort to align them. So these are common problems that a lot of us are facing. And again, siloed teams, dependencies, those are the #1 issues with not defining your products. So I want to now take a pause and turn this over to some questions. Do we have, well, actually one final thought before we go to questions. Once you have defined your product, just like any other thing within Scrum, we learn as we go, and you may need to inspect and adapt the product definition itself. So Scrum is based upon empiricism, and the three pillars of that are transparency, inspection, adaptation. Once you define those products, the fact of defining those products will help you focus on value for your customer, but also consider that your product definition itself may need to be inspected and adapted over time, and that's okay. We learn as we go in every organization, and Scrum helps us learn as we go by helping us be transparent, by helping us inspect and adapt. And once you do define those products, making sure to inspect and adapt the product itself, but also what you're delivering with your product is really important. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to questions and passing the ball over to you, Lindsay.
Okay, so there are a lot of questions coming in. If you happened to put your question into the chat, if you could please move it over to the Q&A, that would be better, because then we capture all the questions in the event that we don't get to all of them. But we have plenty of time, so we should be able to get through quite a few questions. So thanks for that, Mary. That was great. So here is one that came in from someone anonymously. This is a primary issue where I work far too many product owners, essentially one per team. When told that's simply wrong because they're not owning products, the response is always, we have so much work, it can't be done by a single product owner. Without saying you need to fire some of your POs, how do you convince them to reorg correctly?
Got it. So I don't think it's really necessary, even if you, I want to address, there's really two questions there in my mind. So that story of the data processing system, when I told you they had 6 or maybe it was 7 product owners, when they organized around a single product, those product owners were not fired, by the way. They went to other parts of the business, because if they were skilled enough to be a product owner, their skills are definitely needed. Some of them stayed on as BAs, helping that lead product owner, which brings us to my other question. It's too big for a single product owner. That is actually the number one objection. I'm so glad you brought that up. Thank you. That is the number one objection to this. And my answer to that is that product owner, let's say that has 6 or 7 teams, they are not writing every last item on the product backlog. They're delegating some work to the Scrum team. So frequently, a Scrum team let's say a Scrum team has all the skills they need to deliver value. Sometimes those skills are business analysis work. So often what I see in these scaled teams is there are BAs on the Scrum team who help the product owner write product backlog items. Or I say often, not all the time. If they don't have dedicated BA skills, still the product owner can delegate. So developers can write product backlog items. So for that data processing team, we had a product owner for that. There were 60 or 70 people. And in our cases, she might say, okay, my top priority is I want to change the way we're loading data. BA1, I need you to break down stories for that. Break that down, and here's what I'm looking for. BA2, I want you to focus on invoice changes. Here's the invoice updates. So delegation, right? The product owner does not have to write every last product backlog item. What they do need to do is provide focus, right? Here's my vision. This is where we're going. Here's my product backlog. This is where we're going. And making the final call. So they are accountable for the content and ordering of the product backlog, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're writing every last one. They're providing that direction. They're providing that focus. So yes, you can do this. A single product owner can support many teams, many developers, but they don't have to, literally dot the I's and cross the T's for every product backlog item. So thank you for that question. I really appreciate that.
Hey, great. Thank you. I hope that helps. This next one here. Hi, Mary. Would you recommend separating project delivery Scrum teams from BAU maintenance teams? We're finding it difficult to support our projects to deliver to required timescales while we're also supporting other platforms and applications. And then they also said, additionally, to add context, we don't build build, we buy SaaS, and our team is responsible for integrations.
This feels like a conversation we should have like offline, but because there was a lot of moving parts and I want to talk it through, but generally higher level, taking this to a high level, the way I interpreted your question is, what about projects, right? And when you define products, so let's say, I'll just tell a brief story. So websites, right? I've worked on a lot of websites, of course, in my past. And what used to happen is you'd have a website and there'd be really nobody really primarily responsible for the website. And instead we'd run a series of projects. We ran a project to update the website to be mobile, and we ran a project to update the design of the website. We ran a project to update. And so there's this series of projects that get run. And each project has a dedicated team that does that project. And then we move on to the next and then the next. And we're reforming teams all the time. A better way to work is have a single product owner. And we don't run as many projects. And instead, those wind up being items on the product backlog that they're ordering. And if you take that to a larger scale, generally speaking, you're going to have less projects. And those, what would have been a separate project, will now be items or multiple items on the product backlog. And the product owner is deciding, well, first we're going to go mobile, then we're going to update the design of the site, then we're going to update the checkout process. And there may be 50 product backlog items that are ordered, and we're going to do this, this, and this, and this. And that's our order of work operation. So you wind up having fewer projects. But that being said, there still are some projects in the organization. For example, a project might be something that crosses multiple Scrum teams. For example, let's say that we want to update all the servers in the organizations to the newest version of Microsoft, for example. That might be run as a project because it impacts multiple products within the entire organization. So you shift to having more larger infrastructure-related projects often, but fewer projects like update the redesign, and those wind up being on the product backlog. So I hope I've answered your questions. But if not, please reach out to me on LinkedIn.
Okay, great. This next one here, in organizations that ship multiple products, how do you balance the product orientation of each delivery team with trying to avoid multiple teams solving the same problem, each in their own way? If you consolidate common or reusable components into a shared platform team, now you have a new dependency.
Great question. So, and this is the art of product definition. So you need to define those products carefully, right? So that you're starting with the customer. And that's why you start with the customer. So taking that step back and starting with the customer, and what are the services that I provide to this customer, and grouping them together. This is my product, can help avoid a lot of that rework. But you may be, let's look at Microsoft, right? I'm gonna bounce. I kind of glossed over this slide a little bit, but Microsoft, for example, has Microsoft Word, which I see that I've done my icons not correctly, but they have Microsoft Word and they have Microsoft Excel and PowerPoint. Those are separate products, but they also belong to a platform. So you may have a situation like that where you've got a platform that you need to establish, and there will be some overlap. So the way Microsoft actually does their products is, yes, they have a product owner for Excel, PowerPoint, Word, but they also have product owners for personas within that. So we have, for example, there's a product owner for most of the developer tab, right, for developers, and they have stuff in Excel, PowerPoint, and Word that are for developers, and there's a product owner that crosses that. So being thoughtful about your product definition is what I'm saying to you. You may have a situation like this, but beware, again, of Conway's law. If you go crazy with having too many different products, you're going to wind up with, you're going to run into Conway's law. So this is the art of product definition. It is not easy. That's why I said sometimes it's a 2-day workshop where we really are thoughtful about what are the services that we're providing. These go together. These go together. And trying to reduce as much as possible what you just described there, where we have overlapping services or conflicting services. So it's an art, and you may need to iterate.
Awesome, thank you. Hope that helps. This next one here, do all teams always need to be value stream aligned teams at all all of the time. How about enabling platform, etc. teams trying to get this as best as I can?
Gotcha.
What would be their product and what conditions are we expected to have?
So I would, anytime you say, do they all have to be? I would say no, right? It is, there are definitely situations that may be unique to you for various reasons. Some people spectacularly break this idea and do it well. So I have seen successful teams that define their products very narrowly, and they have very strong DevOps as a result. So if you decide to define your products narrowly, you may need to focus on having a really solid DevOps strategy. So no, you don't have to always, all the time, go all full value stream. Although, I mean, my first instinct is leaning towards value stream, but you don't have to. Not there's cases where it may not make sense.
Okay, thank you. Right, next one here. Self-sufficient, self-managed, and self-organized. I see these words have been used interchangeably, but I feel like all these three words have a different meaning. Can I know what you mean by self-organized in your session?
Okay, so self-organized in the for this particular session means controlling what team I'm on. So for example, the organization defines the product and then allowing developers to say, I want to be on this team, I want to be on that team. So that's what I mean by self-organized. That being said, I still think self-managing is really important. So for me, self-managing means the team decides who does work within this, who does which work within the Scrum team. So for example, imagine we're on a website product. And one of the items on the backlog is to update the contact us page. Allowing the developers to decide, okay, Bob's going to take this one, Shelly's going to take that one. You know, that's what I mean by self-managed, and more than that too. Self-managed goes beyond that, but that's one of the hallmarks. And then self-sufficiency, I don't really normally use that within Scrum, but I would think self-sufficient. I don't even want to take a moment to define that because I want to put some more thought into it. But in terms of self-organized, self-managing, that's what I mean when I use those words within the context of this presentation.
Awesome, thank you. Words are fun. All right, so yes, that was a good question. So how do you deal with top management that consider or expect Scrum as a magic wand, expecting miracles in a short period, including defining the ideal product itself?
Okay, so great question. I love working with executives to help them understand that Scrum is a tool that helps us to deliver value. And the role of leadership is to remove impediments from the Scrum team's path, or from the team's path, and making sure that there's role clarity around that. As far as expecting miracles, I think the best way to predict when are we going to get there is allowing the product owner to be responsible and accountable for working with the developers to create that realistic forecast. So I think it's really important. That comes back to me, role clarity, making sure the product owner is forecasting, the leadership team is making sure that impediments are removed and that we're empowering our teams. So to me, it comes back to true leadership is that helping the people deliver value and empowering them to deliver value. And so that to me is what it comes back down to. So making sure that we have role clarity around that is how I would address that issue.
Awesome, thank you. All right, so I'm assuming that the person who asked this is referring to the steps for defining a product, but can this step be facilitated for a product that is already running and in development? I do feel like my team has problems to identify who the stakeholders actually are and the customers for the product.
Absolutely. This can be definitely done for an existing product. You may need to take a step back and redefine the product. It can also be something to reaffirm that we do have the right product. I think I just said the same thing twice, but yes, you can absolutely do this for an existing product to validate that we are set up and structured in the best way to deliver value. And, you know, I didn't talk about this too much, but one of the, I kind of touched on it, but one of the big advantages to defining product is customer focus. And once you define your product, making sure that you're also taking that time to define what's our vision, what's our goal, and then what are the metrics that we're going to use to measure success for this product? What are the outcome-based metrics? When you are organized around products, it makes those metrics so much more meaningful. So for example, if your product is a website, or let's say if your product is a data processing system, then your measures of success is quality, right? How well did we process that data? If you're a website, maybe the measure of success is usage. Are they using the system? So it allows you to focus on the customer truly and have more outcome-based metrics, which will allow you to come up with more reasonable improvement ideas and then communicate that as a roadmap back to your executives. So it really is kind of an end-to-end change.
Awesome. Thank you. All right, this next one. Hi, if you bring a lot of people together in one team to have all of the competencies, what happens to the recommendation of Scrum having 5 to 10 members in the team to be efficient?
Great question. So typically a Scrum team is 10 or fewer, and you may need more than one Scrum team to support that product, but each Scrum team is typically 10 or fewer. So for example, that data processing system, I think there was like 60 or 70 people. I'm really can't recall exactly, but there were multiple Scrum teams all working together to support that product. And in that particular case, we were using Nexus, which is a very great scaling approach to help those teams manage any remaining dependencies amongst themselves, helps them plan together. So you still keep those smaller Scrum teams because it simplifies communication structures within the team, but they're working together on a single product. So Conway's law is not negatively impacted when we have a single product owner, no matter how many Scrum teams there are supporting it.
Awesome. Thank you. All right. Moving right along. These are great questions. Thank you, everybody. So how do I integrate external vendors? Thanks.
It can be done, but it starts with the contracting process. So work with your contracting team, and part of your contract should include how are we going to work together, and that how do we work together often is they're going to be on our Scrum team. They're going to come to our Scrum events. They're going to work side by side with us. So that is how you incorporate external vendors, and it can be done. And by the way, when you say that they're on their team, include in your contract things like we need to keep the same team. We can't be swapping out developers every sprint, right? Because that means we have to train them every sprint. You need team consistency. You need to put in your contract. There is going to be a definition of done that may not be part of the contract, but is separate from the contract. And that those developers don't just hands-on keyboard, right? They should also work with us on refinement. They may need to talk to stakeholders, right? And so all of these things are things that you can consider in an agile contract. So that is my advice to you, is talk with your contracting team and request those. And I would also suggest maybe attend the Professional Scrum Product Owner Advanced class. We do talk about some of the things that you can put in your contract or consider putting in contracts at a high level. We don't get down to the legalese, but what are some considerations that you might take into account when you're contracting with external vendors?
Okay, thank you. All right, tricky question. How does SAFe fit into this, since the framework claims to solve many of these problems?
Great question. So SAFe can be misused and abused to be a Band-Aid over this. You can try and Band-Aid siloed teams with SAFe, but I would suggest, rather than doing that, to take that step back and define your products. SAFe can be a great scaling framework. I would also say that try and minimize the overhead that comes with scaling by defining your products, and also don't overscale. What I'm trying to say is consider a lightweight scaling framework, right? As little structure as possible. The Scrum framework itself, if you think about it, has just enough structure to enable you to deliver value. And that's what you should also consider when selecting a scaling framework. SAFe may have too much overhead for what you need. Maybe you need a lighter weight scaling approach that allows you to talk about dependencies and has just enough structure, but not too much to deliver value. So consider something like Nexus might be a better approach.
Okay, thank you.
By the way,
Right.
we do talk about this in the Scale Professional Scrum class. So take a look at that from Scrum.org.
Yeah, and there was also recently a webinar that one of our professional Scrum trainers, Yurette, did on integrating on times when you can integrate professional Scrum with Safe. So that might have some interesting things in there for you as well. So feel free to check that out. So next one here, as you bring specialized skills onto the same Scrum team, you also need to have those specialized developers willing to expand their skills and work on product backlog items that are outside their technical specialization. Do you agree?
I absolutely agree. Because remember, the purpose, the number one reason we go agile is to deliver value sooner. We don't go agile to keep people busy. And so we need to remember that I'm going to say that important difference. And we may not need a particular skill set 100% of the time, which means they may need to expand their skills and become what a lot of people call T-shaped people. Now, I'm not saying every single person has to be T-shaped, but if that's what the organization needs, that might be what we need. There are some teams that are completely T-shaped that I've worked with where anybody can do any work individually. So it's up to your organization. It's up to you. It's up to your culture. It's up to your Scrum team.
Okay, makes sense. Thank you. All right. So how would you define a role of a product owner? I am the only product owner who is working for both Waterfile and Agile business, and Scrum and Agile tech team is trying to balance out all of the needs, requirements, and dynamics, but I feel like I am constantly failing in organizing a proper strategic product development and continuous improvement.
Okay. Well, I would suggest definitely consider taking the Professional Scrum Product Owner course or the Advanced course. So first off, to get a lot more clarity around the product owner accountability in Scrum. But if I was to do this in a nutshell, the purpose of the product owner is to maximize the value of the product. And your main tool for accomplishing that is your product backlog and your product vision. So that's where I would start with. That's what you do here. And your roadmap is your strategy. It's your strategy for how you're going to achieve your product goal. So what you're doing here is creating alignment. You've got your vision. This is what we're shooting for. We've got your goal. This is our step towards our vision. Here's my roadmap. This is my strategy. And the content and ordering the product backlog, I would also say, is really your strategy for how you're going to achieve that goal. So if you think that you're failing, another thing you can do is start measuring outcomes, right? So for example, if your website is the product, measuring usage, and that's going to tell you a lot and help you adjust your strategy to improve customer outcomes.
Awesome. Thank you. All right. So what advice do you have for a Scrum Master working with an organization that hasn't restructured its teams to align with Agile and has no plans to do so?
Oh.
We are experiencing all 8 of the issues that you listed on your slide.
I would go to the executives and escalate this issue. So a lot of what your Scrum Master does is removing impediments, right? I would say that's a shared kind of accountability, Scrum Master and leadership, but this is an impediment to value delivery. So I would start talking to whoever in your organization that you think can help lead this. So often in the past, for me, it's been the VP level, it's been the director level, but the people who the Scrum team reports into may be able to help you champion this change and start talking about it, calling it out. One thing I've done in the past is literally draw a context diagram of the dependencies, and it was a lot of people called it my spaghetti diagram, and they kind of made fun of it, but it was also a very visual look at this. But talking to those executives, talking to the VPs, and diagramming those dependencies and showing it can be impactful. Another thing I've done in the past is survey the teams and ask them what percentage of your work has dependencies, or what's holding us back from value delivery. So showing escalating this with data also can be very helpful.
Awesome. Thank you. All
Another
right.
thing, I'm going to
Oh,
add
go
one
ahead.
more. I'm going to add one more thing to that. If you can't take the big leap and redefine products, you can do this slowly too. Start by having two teams do refinement together. That's a baby step towards larger product. So if a team has frequent dependencies, maybe they should do a shared refinement. Maybe they should do shared planning. Maybe they should do a shared sprint review. So slowly inching your way into defining products is also a very valid option. Incremental, right? We don't have to
Very
do
true.
it.
Yes. Yep. Awesome. All right. I think we have time just for one more, and then we will figure out a way for Mary to answer the rest of the questions that we did not get to. So don't worry. We will figure out a way to get those addressed. So stay tuned for that. So one final question kind of ties into the end of your last answer. So what product metrics would you recommend for delivering outcomes, especially in technology-focused squads beyond output metrics like throughputs, velocity, cycle time?
Great question. And this is I love the question. Take a look at the evidence-based management course as well. I know I keep recommending courses, but I really believe in them. So I would ask the question, what is the value I'm trying to deliver? So look at your product goal. If my goal is to improve data quality, well, gosh, I ought to be measuring data quality. So your product goal should really inform the metrics that you're using to measure success. But beyond that, you can also, there are no metrics that I can just say, this is the magic metric. It really depends on what is your product. So the metrics for a website are going to be vastly different from a data processing system, for example. But my best tip is to look at your product goal and find metrics that measure progress towards that larger product goal, and not percent complete. I'm not saying that, but things like if I'm focusing on improving the checkout process, I should be measuring shopping cart abandonment rate, for example. So it's very custom to you. And it just depends on where you're headed with your product. But I love that you're asking that question. And that is the next question after you define products is, okay, how do we measure success? Right?
Right. All right. So we are at our time. We want to be conscious of everyone's time. Thank you so much for this, Mary. This was really great. We got some great feedback here from the audience. So it seems like it was helpful. I hope it was for everybody. And we will get these other questions answered in some way, shape, or form. I will connect with Mary after the session. We'll figure that out. So thank you, audience, for your awesome questions. It seemed like a very engaged audience, which is always fun. And yeah, we will see you soon, I hope. All right.
Thank you
Thank
so
you,
much.
everyone.